So now I'm going to show you a way to do the adjustments that's very logical and mathematical, and you'll see why, like for example, you have to put an increase in the provision for bad debts, why that goes in separately to just changing the figure itself and all that. There is a mathematical reason and logic behind it, so we'll just start off. We're told that closing stock is 28,000, so the way we treat that is a bit weird. So if we think about the TPL, basically the cost of sales, or basically like it's essentially how much direct money we're spending on making the product. So how much kind of the stock did we have? So purchases, as I said, even though it's down as purchases, it specifically means the purchase of stock, because purchasing other things usually goes in bank or creditors. But so yeah, this is specifically the purchase of stock. So how much stock did we have this year? We had 94,500 as our opening stock. We bought this much stock, and then we take away the closing stock. So essentially, the closing stock is acting as a revenue. It's reducing. So this is an expense, is how much we spent on stock. It's reducing how much stock we had in the year. And since this is as an expense and we're reducing an expense, that means closing stock is like a revenue. So basically, that's what the first thing that's going to happen. So we have our closing stock is going to be 28,000. Oops, 28,000. And that goes in the trading account as a minus from the cost of sales. If that doesn't make too much sense, you do just kind of like get used to doing it over and over. But let's just think about what we did here. As I said, it kind of works as a revenue like that, because what we're doing is we're technically taking away from an expense. So you can think about it as that. We're doing a minus from an expense. Expense is on the left side, so we're doing minus 28,000. Now what you'll notice is that here in our trial balance, it balances at the bottom. Now if we just take away 28,000 from the left hand side, as we're doing here, all these things on the left, we take away 28,000, it's not going to balance anymore. So we actually have to do something to make sure that it'll cancel out. And what we do is the kind of accounting is kind of like is known as a double entry system. So you'll know that you've made a mistake because it won't balance at the end. So everything goes in twice. So in order for this to balance, it'll have to go in twice. So, and usually the general rule, and pretty much the rule for all, the actual rule to be fair, is that it'll go in once in the trading profit and loss, and it'll go in once in the balance sheet. So since we're not using it this year, this is our closing stock, and we're taking it out of how much stock we had this year, we're going to use it next year. So the 28,000, it's going to be used next year, and you can see if we do it plus 28,000 on the left side, they'll cancel out, which means it'll still balance, and then it also checks out because that means it'll be an asset, right? So if this is a current asset in the balance sheet, the reason it's current is because if you have stock, you don't want to keep the stock for years and years. It's just kind of a short-term thing that you're going to use up, sell it, and then it's gone. So it's a current asset. Again, asset is something we're going to use next year that'll benefit us, and you can see then they cancel out and it balances. So it'll still balance because the net effect is adding 0. So this is basically the little check we do to make sure it all balances at the end after every adjustment. So another example, stock of stationery was 1,100. Okay, cool. So basically what we're saying is 1,100 is for next year. So similarly to the closing stock, it's a current asset. And again, you can get a feel for that now. So I'm doing it the other way around, but you can do it whatever way. So I'm saying this much is a current asset, but that means we didn't use 1,100 this year, right? So again, do a mini trial balance, and look, we just added 1,100 here, but also, so this is to do with stationery, we're going to change, this is our stationery figure for this year, which is 2,400. That means this year we spent 2,400 on stationery. That's not true, because we didn't spend 1,100 on it. That means that we actually spent 1,300, and that's an administration expense. So what did we just do here? We did minus 1,100 from an expense. Look, they cancel out, it'll still balance. Very good. Cool. Part 3. Advertising is for the year ended that. So basically, advertising is for the year. So basically, advertising is for 1 year, and this year ends on the 7th. So that means that the advertising wasn't all for this year. Some of it was for next year. You see that 7 months is for next year. So let's have a look what that 7 months is. It's for next year. So basically, what we have to do is advertising is 5,400. We're going to cross that out because that's we're not going to use that figure anymore. We're going to change it. So we're going to have 5,400, and that's for 1 year. For 1 year. If we divide by 12, we'll get what 1 month is. So I'll do 5,400 over 12. So that means that 450 we have for 1 month. But remember, we want 7 months is for next year. So we'll do 450 multiplied by 7. We get 3,150 for 7 months. And since that's for next year, again, that's a current asset and it goes in the balance sheet. Again, advertising is a short-term thing. It's only for 1 year. You can see it's only until the halfway through next year, so it's not a fixed asset. It's less than 1 year. Same idea for stationery. You wouldn't be keeping that long-term. So yeah, what we've done now is we've added a current asset. So let's have a look. We've added a current asset of 3,150. So you'd expect that we'd have to do a minus 3,150. Yep. So our 5,400, that's how much we spent this year. But that 3,150 is for next year. So now we're doing our minus 3,150. You see it'll cancel out and it'll balance. So we have 5,400 minus 3,150, which is equal to 2,250. And that's actually how much we spent on advertising this year. That's a selling and distribution expense because it's to do with selling the product. And if you're thinking really logically and you want to double check this even further, if we used 7 months next year, that means we used 5 months this year. So to double check our answer, we know that this 450 is for 1 month. So if we do 450 times 5 to get 5 months, we get 2,250, which is exactly what we had here. That's how we know we did it right. So that's a double check, kind of a triple check. This is the first check, and then the second check is what I did just there. Cool. Part 4. The provision should be made on the interest due on the loan. So it's 6% per year. That's the interest rate, right? The thing is, it's not for the whole year because we got the loan at the start of March. So we only had it for 10 months. So we had for 10 months. For 10 months. So let's think about it this way. So we have 6% is for the rate for 1 year. That means if we divide by 12 to get 1 month, 0.5% is for 1 month. But we had it for 10 months, so we multiply by 10, and we get the 5% is for 10 months. So that's actually our interest rate on the that's our interest rate on the loan now. So basically, we're going to take the 5% and we're going to multiply that by the loan, which is 80,000. That'll give us 4,000. Okay. And this is an expense, okay? So we say it's a non-operating expense. Again, for some reason, they just put it at the end. It's not really to do with administration or selling and distribution. It's kind of separate. It's kind of to do with like the finances of the company. Now, we have to take into account as well the amount that we have paid. So we don't really want to talk... Well, I guess we technically could talk about how much we have paid, but it's kind of redundant. Because if I said that we paid 1,300... and then we had to pay 4,000 in total, that means 2,700 is due. Basically, that's just not how they do it. The way that they like to treat it is a bit differently. So the way that it works is what we put in the TPL is what we should have paid this year, technically. So, or not technically what we should have paid, but we need to pay the interest, obviously, as it's due. So we did pay the 4,000, or we should have paid the 4,000. That means that we have 2,700 left. And the way that we treat it is, again, as I said, in the TPL, you technically could say, oh, we paid 1,300, then we have 2,700 due. But then obviously this 2,700, since we're adding that to the left side, we'd have to add it to the right side. So they don't really bother with that. I guess we can kind of think of it like that in a sense. I will do that actually. So let's just say we're doing our account out, and let's say we have 1,300 paid on the left, because that's what we have here. But in total, we want 4,000. So that means we have 2,700 not yet. So this 1,300 was already there. So we don't actually have to worry about that when it's balancing, because you can see the 1,300, it's still balanced. So I'm actually going to move that up here just so you can see. That means that we need to add a 2,700 onto the right or onto the minus it from the left. Since we haven't paid it yet, it's a type of liability. So that's why we write 2,700 as a current liability in the balance sheet. So then the 1,300 was already there. That's still balanced, as you can see up here with the 1,300. So we have 2,700 not yet. We have 200,700 current liability. See, these two balance, so it's all good. But instead of putting 1,300 paid and this in the trading profit and loss, there's no point in saying we haven't paid this yet and this is a current liability. We usually just add these both together. So this is balanced right now. We usually add these both together and we say 4,000. And we just wouldn't write these two. So we wouldn't write this in, and instead we just have the 4,000. But you can see it is still balanced because I did all this out. Now, should you try to do that out every single time? Maybe the first few times if you want to get used to it, but as a whole, it helps you to remember that what you basically do is you have the total amount you should have paid in the TPL and how much is left as a current liability. Notice for all of these, it's one entry in the TPL and one entry in the balance sheet. One entry, TPL, one balance sheet, TPL, balance sheet, TPL, balance sheet. You can see we put everything in twice. Should be a common trend you're seeing, and you can see the reason why is to make sure that it still balances at the end. Part 5, included in the insurance check for 1,500, which is for his private car insurance. Okay, so basically our insurance figure, which is here, 9,600, cross it out to make sure that you don't put in the old figure because we're going to change it. 9,600 minus 1,500 because that's actually not in the insurance. It's for his own private car insurance. So that'll give us 8,100, and that's our expense in admin for the company. So he only actually spent that much. What did we just do? We did minus 1,500 to an expense, so to the left side. Now remember, things for your own private use, that's what drawings are. So as you'd expect, it would increase his drawings, and we'll double check that in a second. So his drawings are 12,400. So now he's taken out more, so we add it. But I'll show you the mathematical reason in a second. Plus 1,500, that gives us 13,900. And that's a minus in the financed by, because he's basically taking money out of the company's kind of financial, what the company is funded by. So that's why we take it out there. And what did we just do? Well, drawings is on the left, so that makes sense intuitively. Take it out of insurance, put it into drawings. Mathematically, we did minus on the left side from an expense. Drawings, though, is also on the left side, so we did plus 1,500 on the left side. And as you can see, they cancel out, it'll still balance. So, and you can see one entry in the trading account, one entry in the balance sheet. Part 6. Provision for bad debts adjusted. Okay, cool. So to 5% of debtors. So debtors is 54200. I'm not going to cross that out because I'm not actually changing the debtors figure. I'm only changing the provision. So we don't want to cross that out. Let me calculate that. 0.05 times 54,200 is 2,710. That's our provision for bad debts now. So we're doing that as a minus from debtors. So remember, that's technically a current liability. Okay. And how do we get this to balance? Well, be careful. We don't just write 2,710 here because we're not adding 2,710 to the right-hand side. You can see we already have 1,900 there. Okay. Now we're not going to use that figure anymore. Cross it out. What's the difference between 1,900 and that? Well, it's 810. You can put it into your calculator if you're not sure. 1,900. Yep. So basically what we're doing is we have it at 1,900, but we want to bring it up to 810. Therefore, we add 810 to the right-hand side. Okay. So, and since it's increasing, that means we're basically paying in more money just in case we have a bad debt. So we need an entry on the left side. So we can put that in as an expense. We can put in 810. Let's say we'll do 810 as our provision for bad debts increase. And that's a selling and distribution expense because debtors are people that that owe us money, which means we gave them products. So obviously that's to do with distribution and selling stuff. And as you can see, it balances there. So that's the reason we put it in twice. It's to make sure it still balances at the end. That's why we do everything twice. See, this is in the balance sheet. This is in the TPL. So it all checks out. And part 7. Depreciation. Okay, depreciation is quite straightforward, and you can see how it works. So buildings, first, it's 2%. Let's have a look at the cost of buildings, 400,000. So then do that, you'll get like 8,000, I think, roughly in my head. 400,000. Yeah, it's 8,000. All right, and that's for this year, isn't it? So anything this year, that's in the trading profit and loss for anything this year. But now what have we done? That goes in as an expense in the TPL. It's an admin one to do with the buildings. We also need 8,000 on the right-hand side. So remember our depreciation up here, you can see it was a liability. So we're going to add 8,000 on the right-hand side. So we're going to do 800,000, and that's our... now, it technically is a liability, but remember, because it's to do with the buildings, as you can see in the balance sheet, we just take it away, even though it's a liability, we take it away up here with the assets just because they're connected. It makes more sense to show it up here than down there. So even though I'm writing it as a liability, I write minus and then fixed asset just so I remember. And they balance, cool. And there's no other depreciation on buildings, so we don't have to worry about it. Next one's delivery vans, is it? Yeah. Delivery vans is 10% of the net book value. So for delivery vans, it cost 52,000. There's this much depreciation, so the net book value is the difference, 37,000. 37,000. Which goes to 3,700. Again, that's this year, that's expense, and vans have to do with selling stuff, so it's selling and distribution. And now our accumulated depreciation, so how much are we going to do in the balance sheet? So again, let's have a think. This is an expense, 3,700. So we need to add 3,700 onto the right-hand side. But we don't just write 3,700 minus fixed asset because on the right-hand side, we already have 15,000 depreciation. So we don't want to use that figure. Instead, we're going to add it onto this. So we're adding 3,700 to the right-hand side, but we're lumping that in with the accumulated depreciation. So it's going to become 18,700 when I add 15,000 and the 3,000 for this year. 18,700 minus fixed asset. So you can see the logic behind that. And then finally, office equipment is 5% of cost. Cost is 40,000, so we have 0.05 times 40,000. I think that's 2,000, but I'll do it into the calc just in case. Calc's short for calculator, by the way, I'm just using slang. 2,000, that's for this year. So it goes in as an admin expense, and then it also goes, so again, that's expense. We also need to add 2,000 as on the right-hand side, and as you can see, how much depreciation do we already have? Well, we have 25,000 already, so we add 25,000 and 2,000 gives us 27,000 as our minus from our fixed asset. Okay. And yep, so that's all the adjustments and that's the logic behind them. Hope that was useful.